Your Highness, Excellencies, friends, and colleagues, Assalamu alaikum, bonjour, buenos dias, good morning. As Jim suggested, when we affirm creativity to be at the heart of education, we immediately encounter resistances. We immediately encounter popular misconceptions. Two in particular. Number one, the belief that somehow creativity is just given to a few people. There are only a few people who are born with creative gifts and talents. The rest of us just bump along. The second, but before we go to the second misperception, let me deal with that one, because that's a quick and easy one, isn't it? Anyone who works with children or has studied child development knows that we are all born curious, creative, imaginative. That is the human DNA. We learn by exploring the world. We learn and understand by inventing, as Jean Piaget said. The average 4-year-old asks 100 questions a day. Most kindergartners think of themselves as artists. But by the time children have become, say, 12 years old, they've come to understand that it's much more important to give the right answers than to ask good questions. They've come to understand they're not in school to create, but rather to absorb knowledge. The second misperception is that creativity is somehow a frill, an extracurricular activity, something that's kind of nice to have, but not essential. Now, to confront that view, we must deeply understand fundamental changes that have taken place in our world in the last few years with surprising speed. For most of human history, the people who had the greatest respect in our communities, in our companies, in our countries, were those who had acquired the greatest knowledge. Throughout human history, we have revered people who have acquired more knowledge than the rest of us. And our degrees from our schools and universities certify the acquisition of more knowledge than other people may have. That competitive advantage is disappearing very rapidly. Why? Today, knowledge has become a commodity. It's free. It's like air. It's like water. It's on every internet-connected device. What that means is the world simply no longer cares how much you know. No competitive advantage. Because the person next to you can go figure it out and learn it just in time. Rather, what the world cares about, what matters most, is not what you know, but what you can do with what you know. And that's a brand new and very different education problem. Because now it's not a matter of, it's not enough to have content knowledge. Sure, that's important. Necessary, but not sufficient. So what that means is that increasingly around the world, I'm encountering people who don't trust these credentials that schools and colleges give out, certifying that you have served a certain amount of seat time and acquired a certain amount of knowledge. A couple of examples. You know, Google, famous company, used to be they only hired people from name brand colleges with the highest test scores and grades. And you couldn't even get an interview at Google unless you'd gone to certain universities. Well, they hired a guy by the name of Laszlo Bock who ran the data and discovered that these indices were, quote, worthless. His words. Google has totally revamped their hiring process. They no longer ask for your college transcript. In fact, 15% of their new hires don't have a college degree at all. What are they looking for? People who know how to tackle complex analytic problems. And that's what they ask for in structured interviews. They want to know your experience. They want to know what you can do, not what you know. I thought Google is maybe a one-off kind of crazy Silicon Valley company, but I was in Ho Chi Minh City last winter at an event sponsored by Deloitte, the accounting and consulting company. I was talking to the CEO over lunch. She didn't know anything about Google, but she said, you know, we no longer hire our best students from our best universities anymore. They don't work out so well, she told me. Instead, we look for good students And we put them through a kind of summer camp in order to understand how they work together to solve problems. Talking to a CEO of a startup recently, she said, I have the worst time hiring people. And she's in Boston. She interviews kids from MIT and Harvard and places like that. She said, I just want somebody who can go in and figure it out. Heck of a job description. Just go figure it out. She can't find students who can do that. What the world wants, in a word, are people who can innovate. And more knowledge does not necessarily mean greater capabilities for innovation. So what I've been trying to do for the last few years is really understand what must we do differently to develop capabilities for innovation. Now, there are two kinds of innovators I've learned. One is someone who brings new possibilities to life, whether it's in art or technology. And that may be fairly rare in human experience. That may be more a matter of certain innate gifts. But the other kind of innovation, the one that is needed at least as much, is someone who can solve problems creatively, who brings new ways of thinking, new ways of connecting to the solution of problems, to the asking and answering of complex questions, to the creation of new knowledge. So I've been trying to understand what must we do differently as parents, as teachers, as mentors, and as employers to develop the capabilities of many, many more of our young people to be the creative problem solvers that they want to be and that we need them to become. I've started interviewing a wide range of young people in their 20s from all over the world, some from privilege, some from poverty. Some from developed countries, some from developing countries, all over the world. I interviewed their parents, trying to understand if there were patterns of parenting that had helped them to become the creative problem solvers that, in fact, they were. I asked them about their education. Very interesting. One of my first discoveries is that they had become innovators in spite of their schooling, not because of it. Some of them had gone to the world's leading universities, Harvard, Stanford, MIT. They could not talk about anything in their formal course work that had contributed to their capacities as a creative problem solver. But then I asked them, can you name a teacher who's made a significant difference in your life? And almost all of them could name at least one teacher, and it was from kindergarten all the way to graduate school, rarely more than one or two. So I interviewed those teachers, watched them teach. And I came to understand something deeply troubling. In every single case, the teachers who had made the greatest difference in the lives of these young innovators was an outlier, someone who taught in ways that were fundamentally different than his or her peers. Yet remarkably similar to one another, I discovered, and also similar to the kind of teaching you see in places like the Montessori classrooms, Reggio Emilia classrooms, MIT's Media Lab, and places of that sort. And so what I've come to understand is that the culture of schooling, as we have continued to practice and perpetuate it, is fundamentally and radically at odds with a culture of learning that develops the capabilities to innovate. There are 5 fundamental challenges. Number 1, culture of learning is all about celebrating and measuring individual achievement. Well, that's fine, except that innovation is above all a team sport. There is no innovation without deep collaboration. Knowing this, these teachers built accountable collaboration into every single assignment they gave, and they team taught whenever they could. Number 2, the culture of schooling is all about compartmentalizing knowledge and favoring specialization. But the problem is, innovation happens at the boundaries of academic disciplines, almost never within them. Knowing this, these teachers built interdisciplinary courses around challenging problems that needed solving or understanding. Contradiction number 3 is the culture of classrooms. Around the world, it's so often a culture of passivity and consumption, and even infantilization. There's only one expert in the room, that's the person at the front doing all of the talking. By contrast, teachers interested in innovation think of themselves as coaches whose job it is to coach students to a higher performance standard and to empower students to solve real problems and to create, not merely consume. Contradictions 4 and 5 are the most challenging of all. Contradiction number 4 is all about the F word, failure. It's the worst thing that can happen in school. It's what we have nightmares about. The fear of failure creates a climate of compliance and of risk aversion throughout education for teachers as much as for students. The problem is, innovation demands that you take risks, that you make mistakes, and that you fail. IDEO, Sandy Spiker is here from IDEO. She will tell you, IDEO has a company motto, the most innovative company in design in the world. Their company motto is fail early and fail often. Other companies talk about failing fast, failing forward, failing cheap, but failing. Why? Because there is no innovation without trial and error. There's no learning without trial and error. I went to the D school at Stanford and very worried about this issue of assessment and grading. They said, yeah, we're kind of thinking F is the new A. Now, I don't recommend taking that back to your school systems just yet. Needs a little refinement. But finally, I talked to a young woman at the Olin College of Engineering, extraordinary college. She said, you know, we don't talk about grades or GPAs, but we obsess about iteration. My new favorite word, iteration. Moving from 1.0 to 2.0. Learning how to reflect on your mistakes, reflect on your work, and apply what you've learned to your next effort. Knowing this, these teachers assess students on a body of work. And very often, the grade was merely credit, no credit, not A, B, C, D, F. The last challenge is all about motivation, isn't it? Because as you know, we rely heavily on extrinsic incentives to motivate learning. Carrots and sticks, fear of failure, and rewards with good grades or money or cars. The problem is, I discovered, that throughout the world, the young innovators whom I have interviewed, again, from privilege and poverty, were far, far more intrinsically motivated, wanting to make a difference, much more than they wanted to make A's or money. So I went back, trying to understand what had their parents and teachers done to develop the intrinsic motivation that was so common among these many, many young people. And I found another pattern. In every case, both parents and teachers had encouraged explicitly 3 things: play, passion, and purpose. Parents encouraged much more exploratory play, fewer toys, toys without batteries, more time outside. They limited screen time. Teachers tried to build a spirit of play into the kind of teaching they did. Ed Carrier, who teaches engineering at Stanford, talked about bringing an element of whimsy into the kinds of assignments he gave his teams of students. As students grow older, the parents were very observant, trying to understand what most engaged and interested their young people, because they believed that for a young person to find and pursue a real interest that could become a passion was much more important than mere academic achievement for its own sake. It's where we learn grit, tenacity, perseverance, self-regulation, self-discipline. So they've supported and celebrated their child's interest no matter what it was. Teachers, the same, tried to build time into the curriculum for young people to explore their ideas, their interests, to stay curious. As these young people grew older, their passions morphed, they evolved, they changed, but in every case they matured to a deeper sense of purpose, a desire to give back or in some way make a difference. That's because both parents and teachers had instilled one simple lesson: the idea that we are not here on this earth just to serve ourselves. We have some responsibility to give back and to make a difference, and to try to understand and empathize with those who are very different from ourselves. So I have very little time left, but let me simply suggest some critical steps we must consider as we think about how to move away from the culture of schooling to a culture of innovation in schools. First and foremost, we must agree on the outcomes that matter most. We are defining and measuring old, wrong, obsolete outcomes. More content knowledge. Content knowledge you can find right here. We must agree on core competencies as the most important outcome, using rich and challenging content to acquire them. Critical thinking, the ability to ask really good questions, collaboration, communication, and creative problem solving. Secondly, we must assess the outcomes that matter most. What gets tested is what gets taught. What gets measured is what matters. Unless and until we develop sophisticated assessments of the outcomes that matter most, they will not be taught. I want to see every young person begin school with a digital portfolio that follows them through school, where they begin to acquire evidence of mastery of core competencies. And they graduate with a certificate of mastery, not a certificate of seat time served. To create that kind of new education, we need to fund and incent educational research and development. And this is what WISE does so well. And I'm so excited and proud to be a part of this effort, because you are trying to find the leading educators and support them and embrace their work. That's educational R&D. There is no innovation without R&D. You know, all of the leading companies of the world have a research and development budget. Where are your educational R&D budgets? We want to incent teams of teachers to create new interdisciplinary courses, new approaches to assessment, and ultimately to create laboratory schools that are exemplars, existence proofs of radically different forms of education. And those lab schools must eventually become the schools that prepare the next generation of teachers. Finally, I want to see every class have Google time. You know what Google time is? You go to work for Google, you have permission to play on company time a day a week. What if we said to every young person, you have this certain percentage of time to be the architect of your own learning in every classroom? What if there was more play, passion, and purpose in every classroom? And what does it look like? So for the last 2 years, I've been working with a team to create a feature-length documentary film to show what this kind of education can look like. We brought a little 3-minute clip along with us to show you. But if you want to see a larger clip and stay informed, go to learninginnovation.us. learninginnovation.us. But let's roll this little clip and see what you think.
The philosophy of High Tech High is founded largely on the idea of kids making, doing, building, shaping, and inventing stuff. The engineers that I know, the architects I know, the artists I know, the great educators that I know, the entrepreneurs that I know, are all sort of perplexed and curious about how they can do it better the next time. And that type of perplexity leads to engagement, it leads to learning, it leads to innovation. We are trying to have that type of perplexity and curiosity get inculcated in our students in everyday practices.
We had to learn about civilizations, the Mayans, the Romans, and the Greeks. And Scott and Mike didn't want to just teach us this. So they came up with this big wheel, which is a big gear, which has a lot of drawings on it, and is connected to all these other mechanisms, and they each represented our theory.
Then they had to, on their own, develop and defend an idea on why they think civilizations rise and fall.
So we had to create like a flow chart just explaining what our theory was, and then we got critiques on it, and then we created a group one.
Another piece is on the mechanical side. They need to take what's already an abstract concept with their theory, and they have to take that and actually physically manifest it. They have some very preliminary metrics they need to use. They know that there's going to be a big wheel turning at a certain RPM. They know how many teeth that is, so they have basically a box to work within, some bounds to work within, and they have to make everything.
Yeah, I can get one.
Oh, I put the wrong side in. Oh my god,
So we have an exhibition that we're preparing for right now, and it'll be tomorrow night, and there will be thousands of people here looking at student work, students presenting their work, visitors looking at the work, students presenting their work to each other. And I think that idea of making work public, that's a missing piece to me in schools in general.
this idea of sort of making something and having a public exhibition and having people come look at it. And you have that feeling that we all have, like, how did they do that? When kids have that feeling, it's transformative for them. I made this, and everyone's coming to look at it.
Let me leave you with one final thought. You know, we are dependent upon consumer spending in most of the world's economies, far too much so in my view. I believe that approach to economic development of focusing on consumer spending is unsustainable environmentally, economically, spiritually. What if? What if instead of educating our children to be consumers, we educated them to be creators? What if we educated them to be creative problem solvers and working to solve the major problems and challenges we all face around the world, beginning with the issue of sustainability? Thank you very much.